Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and spending your lunch hour with us to talk with the team at Pulsetile about the amazing new product that they're building and to hear more about their campaign. So, my name is Kirsten. I'm the CEO here at Birchal. And just before I introduce you to Alicia and the team, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I'm calling in from today. Birchal is based on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay our respects to elders past and present, and also acknowledge and welcome any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us on the call today. So today I'm joined by Alicia, Nicolette and Paul from the Pulsetile team, and Birchal is working with Pulsetile on an upcoming crowdsource funding offer. If you're new to crowdsource funding or you haven't heard of it before, you might be familiar with it as equity crowdfunding, and it's a form of fundraising in Australia that allows startups and small and growing businesses to raise capital from a large number of smaller and retail investors, in addition to wholesale or sophisticated investors through an online platform like Birchal. So instead of seeking funding from traditional sources like banks or private equity or venture capital, crowdsource funding allows companies to turn to the general public, often their own communities, to raise money in exchange for their investors becoming shareholders in the business. So for founders, this is a way to build a community and turn your passionate supporters into shareholders. And for investors, it's a way for us to back ideas and founders that we think deserve to be successful and to get a slice of the success when they are. So Birchal Financial Services will be the licensed intermediary of this offer. The information and the content shared in this webinar is for informational purposes only and shouldn't be considered as advice or as a recommendation to invest. Please always do your own research and always consider the offer document and the general CSF risk warning before investing. More information on both is available at our website, birchal.com. How today's session is going to run. So Alicia and the team are going to take us through a quick introduction, and then they're going to share a presentation all about the work that they're building and the progress so far. If you look on your Zoom screen, if you hover your mouse down along the bottom menu bar down there, you'll see a little Q&A box. So if you have a question during the presentation or afterwards, feel free to drop it into that Q&A section at any time. And then following the presentation, I'll facilitate a discussion with the team where we'll run through those questions, and you'll have a chance to ask them any questions that you have. We are recording the session today, so if you do need to drop off early for any reason, don't stress. We will send a recording around afterwards so you can catch up on anything that you miss out on. So without further ado, Alicia, I'd love to introduce you and for you to introduce yourself and the team and to take us through what you're building at Pulsetile.
Yes, thank you, Kirsten. And good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to spend with us at our webinar. I'm Alicia King, founder and CEO of Pulsetile Innovations, and I'm joined by my teammates Paul and Nicolette. And we have a bit of a team slide, so I might make some opportunity there for Paul and Nicolette to speak to their background and expertise when we get to that. I just want to start with that we're so stoked with the amazing support we've been shown so far, and that's through Birchal and everyone who's here today and anyone who's registered with the EOI so far. And now just looking forward to sharing a bit more with you about what we've been up to over the next hour. Let's get into it. We're going to show you how at Pulsetile Innovations we're revolutionising the approach to CPR and first aid. And so the problem is recognizing cardiac arrest. And so that is when someone collapses and that their heart has stopped. You might have heard of doctors A, B, C, D. It's the approach to a person to determine how unwell they are and if they require resuscitation or CPR. So depending on your level of training, you go through doctors A, B, C, D, and C can stand for either start CPR or check for a pulse. But we know that breathing and pulse checks are subjective and inherently unreliable. They cause delays to CPR and defibrillation, and those delays can lead to harm and even death. And we know that for every 1 minute CPR is delayed and required, chance of survival reduces by 10%. And so we know that time and accuracy is absolutely crucial. And so this problem is not exclusive to healthcare professionals. Yes, trained rescuers can have a difficult time recognizing cardiac arrest because feeling a pulse with your fingers can be tricky. That's often due to feeling your own pulse or having a lack of resources, or patients being very unwell with extremely low blood pressures, but their hearts could still be beating. And for people who are not trained in CPR and to witness a cardiac arrest outside of a hospital setting, it's even more problematic. The very first cardiac arrest that I attended, I was back in uni on placement on the ambulance, and it was a 40-year-old man who had collapsed in the street. There were no less than 8 people standing around him, and they weren't performing CPR because one of those people said that he was breathing. And by the time we got to him, we performed CPR for 45 minutes, but it was too late and we couldn't save him. And so I often wonder in those, I reflect on that and I think about him. And I think if those people who were not trained in CPR had access to a solution that reduced that confusion and moments of hesitation, could that person still be alive today? And we've got a device for everything. And so why don't we have a device? We'll start talking about the solution shortly, but why don't we have a device that tells us whether or not someone is in cardiac arrest? And so I'll show you this short video, and it's the current medically trained person's approach to cardiac arrest. So I checked for dangers and response, to look in the airway and make sure it's clear, and look, listening and feeling for breathing for no more than 10 seconds. And then I go to check a pulse, again for no more than 10 seconds. But because I'm in doubt, I have to start CPR. And that's in really the most optimal conditions possible. We know that in real life, only 20% of healthcare professionals are able to correctly identify a pulse within the required 10 seconds. And only 50% of them are able to do it within a minute. So time can get away very quickly. In Australia, there are 26,000 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests that occur each year. Less than 13% survive. There's evidence that shows even less than 10% survive. But we know that chance of survival can double and even triple if good quality CPR is started within 2 minutes. But confidence to start and continue effective CPR remains low. And so to speak to my background and how I know all of this, my name is Alicia King. I've been an ambulance paramedic and registered nurse for over 12 years. I've spent many of those years managing staff. I currently have a staff of 42, although I am on leave for work at the moment. When I go back, it's a staff of 42. And I've also managed first responders and training first responders for a number of years. And so all of that has led to being involved in hundreds of cardiac arrest attendances and resuscitation attempts. And so that's why I came up with and invented PulseTile. It's a single-use adhesive pulse sensing device. It's designed to be applied to the neck of a person in suspected cardiac arrest. It's a platform technology, and it informs the rescuer, regardless of their medical training or backgrounds, quickly and accurately regarding the presence or absence of a pulse, and prompts either the start of chest compressions or withholding CPR to look for other things that you could do for that person. Because we know that if CPR is being performed where it's not required, the victim is having delays to other life-saving interventions. And so I'm very careful with how I communicate this, because we 100% want our messaging to be, when in doubt, perform CPR. So please, if you find yourself in this situation and you're not sure, don't hesitate, start CPR. We're just demonstrating that there's going to be an easy alternative that seamlessly fits into the current approach and removes that doubt. And so to compare with that previous video, I've got this one. And so I still check for dangers. We still look for a response. I still have to make sure that the airway is clear. But instead of wasting all that time with breathing and pulse checks, I've applied PulseTile. Within 5 seconds, I was informed that there was no pulse. And then I started chest compressions quickly and confidently. And so PulseTile will be a Class 2B medical device here in Australia with the TGA. It uses a novel array of existing technologies. So we're not inventing a new type of sensor, but we are leveraging what's already available to ensure accuracy, eliminating false negatives and false positives that are often encountered in the field. It features a CPR feedback mechanism. So it'll be a light bar, sort of like a traffic management system. So you've got the red, amber, and green where it informs rescuers regarding the rate and depth of their chest compressions. So it's empowering them to go faster or deeper. They're both very crucial aspects to performing the most effective CPR possible, which will make defibrillation more effective. And so you can see on the screen, this is a render of what we anticipate will look like in the future. This is our second version of prototype that's currently being used in our animal studies. And to use it, it'll be, if you're familiar with, a defibrillation pad. So you peel off a backing to reveal an adhesive, place it on the neck, it's wire-free, and then within 5 seconds, it informs you whether or not there's a pulse. And so you're just following very simple light indicators to either perform CPR or seek other life-saving intervention. And so there's no device like PulseTile on the market. Rescue Doppler is being produced by a group in Norway. They're using ultrasound technology to solve the same problem. This is a very widely accepted problem. But their solution, regarding the ultrasound, it remains expensive. It's cumbersome. It's got wires attached to it, so it's not a standalone device. And I guess most importantly, it requires training to use. So we're very much trying to move away from that, having to find and interpret data. The other one to look out for is smartwatches. Your Apple, Samsung, and Google are big players and have got FDA clearance on aspects of their smartwatches. But that only detects pulselessness. It doesn't actually give feedback to a rescuer or a bystander that CPR is either required or not, and then give that feedback on their chest compressions. So we've got a strong barrier to entry for competitors because all of that has informed our intellectual property IP strategy. So PulseTile has been designed for everybody. I've alluded to that already. But for trained rescuers, it provides a whole extra resource by acting as an extra set of hands, reducing cognitive load and supporting clinical judgment. I've spent a number of years on an ambulance in very rural and remote settings of Victoria, and it could be just me and a volunteer on an ambulance, and to have that ability and that extra resource, that extra set of hands when resources are low, has proven to be a really valuable aspect of PulseTile. And for untrained rescuers, it provides confidence to start and continue effective chest compressions. Eliminating those fears of getting it wrong, there's still a really strong unfounded fear of litigation among bystanders and good Samaritans. And by removing that onus of responsibility onto a device, is a real value add for those people. So our go-to market strategy is clear. We'll first pitch and sell to healthcare organisations, including ambulance services, hospitals, and other medical and allied health facilities here in Australia. And the strategy behind that is to generate early revenue, but also clinical validation and data generation to support expansion into and sales into community centres, first responder organisations, sporting clubs, and then into retail, so that it can be in everybody's first aid kit in their home. Our vision is that PulseTile will sit alongside every publicly available defibrillator and in everybody's first aid kit, so that good CPR can be done sooner and save some lives. Early on in our project, we surveyed 172 different stakeholders. A lot of them were CPR trained, and most notably, despite more than 90% of them being trained, only 60% of them were not confident to recognise cardiac arrest. And so many questions we get are along the lines of, if they're not breathing, just start CPR. But this survey alone just highlights that it isn't necessarily that simple. And this is supported by literature, where you'll find evidence that supports that while people are very willing to do that CPR, hesitation around starting and continuing is a hard reality. And of course, most notably, that even for all of those trained responders, 87% would still see value in a device that takes that subjectivity away. And so they would use PulseTile if it was made available to them. It reflects that need for a device that reduces human error, cognitive load, and providing objectivity during some of the most critical moments of decision making anyone might experience. And so We formed Pulsatile Innovations at the very end of 2023, so very early on in our journey still, so just on 2 years, but have created some really solid traction so far. Happy to speak to this further if anyone's got any questions about it, but we've got our working prototype. We're already participating in large animal studies I mentioned to you earlier. We've got sound regulatory and clinical pathways and plans to make a difference in not that long a time frame. And I think we might speak to that as questions come up. So I've mentioned that Pulsatile is a platform technology. So we've included in our IP strategy multiple iterations, which, not only we've got that CPR feedback feature, but in the future we've covered aspects of software connectivity such as Bluetooth, so that a receiving hospital can have early data and an early idea regarding the events that's led up to that person arriving in their care. We've also got in the pipeline a family of pulse detection devices for different places on the body. So if anyone's ever tried to feel a pulse in the foot, you'll know it can be really tricky, but it needs to be done to assess severity of a limb injury. And so all of that adds to the future plans that we've got ahead of Pulsatile. And so we've got a wealth of leadership and experience in our team and advisory group. Everyone has been really carefully selected as leaders in their relevant fields. And it might be a good time to hand over to maybe Paul and then Nicolette, just to speak to your experience and what you're bringing to the team at Pulsatile Innovations. Over to you, Paul.
I can jump in. I was just pressing send on an answer to Kirsten's question. I'm Paul Stoddart, the CTO for Pulsatile Innovations. I'm a professor of biomedical engineering at Swinburne, so I've got a long sort of history in the medical device space and have contributed to a number of inventions in this kind of physiological monitoring and other areas of biomedical technology. And particularly strong background, I guess, in optical methods of monitoring and diagnosing physiological conditions. So, really enjoying this journey with Alicia and enjoying applying all of my background knowledge to solving this new problem.
Thanks, Paul. Nicolette?
Yes, so my name is Nicolette Miller. I am the Regulatory Quality Affairs Lead for Pulsatile. So my background is mostly in medical device development. I've got more than 18 years of experience in medical device development, but also registering products all over the world. So in Europe, US, and in Australia. I've got a background in molecular microbiology, but mostly during my career, I've been focused on helping medical device companies from beginning to end. So from starting off on a journey like this to where we are now, but also taking these products through regulatory approvals. And yeah, very excited to be a part of this team, very excited for this journey. I think this is an absolutely fantastic product. And the way that we are developing it, we are definitely positioning it to have this regulatory approval as soon as possible and having it done efficient and in a successful manner.
Thanks, Nicolette. I've got one more slide on the use of funds and happy to speak to this more. We're here to secure that product development and market launch support that will be available through funds. And so it'll be advancing those regulatory applications, continuing our R&D to complete the final stages of our MVP, and then work towards our clinical trials. That's all from my slide presentation. Thank you, Kirsten.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alicia, Nicolette and Paul. And thanks, Paul, as well, for jumping in and doing some of the early answers on the questions that have been coming through as well. Super helpful. I just am so impressed by what you guys have built. And just to share for everyone else who's on the call as well, I'm very much a first responder family. My parents managed a swimming pool growing up, and so I've been a pool lifeguard. My brother's a working paramedic. I'm a patrolling surf lifesaving member. So as soon as I first connected with Alicia and heard about what she was building, I could just instantly see the use for this in all of these different environments, and really, excited that we get to play a part in helping you through this next stage of the scaling journey. But I wonder if you might be able to start by answering a question that I know has sort of come up a lot, which is that anyone who's done recent first lifesaving surf lifesaving or CPR training will know that that pulse check step has actually sort of been taken out of the recommended process for ordinary people if they're in this first responder situation. So if that's the case, does that mean that pulse tile isn't useful in these situations, or how do you how do you answer that question?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's one I get a little bit as well. So yeah, you're 100% right. I think it was in 2005, pulse checks were removed from like BLS, that's basic life support CPR training. I think that just highlights how unreliable they are, and that we need to be looking for a solution for all responders, because as I've highlighted, only 20% of even trained healthcare professionals can do it properly, let alone those people going through CPR training. Is pulse tile still relevant? I think absolutely. We are reducing all of that uncertainty around breathing checks, which still remain a critical component of that doctor's ABC assessment for BLS trained people. And not only that, I think we've got some testimonials who talk about who have done CPR on a family member, and thankfully Annette won't mind me speaking about her, but that if she had a device that had removed the onus of responsibility, if she was able to look at a device and then not only be confident that it's producing objective, correct data, but if she was very lucky to have had a good outcome with her husband, he survived. But had there been a poor outcome, she says, at least I would know that it was a device that was telling me what to do. I'll never have to question my own practice. I'll never have to reflect on everything that I did and wonder, did I do it right? All of that is objectively delivered via a device. And I think that speaks to like that real opportunity for a space, even if pulse checks, are not required as part of everyday CPR algorithm. I would just reiterate that when in doubt, yes, please perform CPR. Like, why don't we just remove the doubt? Like, there doesn't have to be doubt. So
yeah, I mean, it's a super powerful example, I think, and I'm sure anyone who's either been in that situation or can imagine it can just imagine that sort of emotional overwhelm if you're performing CPR on someone you care about, and then all of the layers of questioning and the lack of confidence to proceed would be just a lot to be dealing with in a very intense situation. There was a question on the chat which Paul answered, but I think it would be helpful to sort of explain how you see pulse tile fitting alongside the other kind of tools and devices that are used in a CPR situation. So we've got defibrillators, we've got pulse oximeters, we've got pulse tile. How do you see these things working? Are they part of a single team that work together? Is it a choice of one over the other? Talk us through.
Yeah, for sure. It's it complements all of those things. And so, the pulse oximeters have their place because they take a reading from, a distal part of the body. We know that the first place to lose a pulse is your extremities. And so pulse oximetry is great for monitoring patients with really good pulses and good blood pressures. But the reliability of those readings reduces as blood pressure reduces, someone collapses, the heart slows down, all those things. So what we have with pulse tile is the opportunity to monitor centrally, the closest pulse location to the heart, and therefore the most accurate and the last one sort of to give out. And so, we need to be using all of those pieces of equipment, absolutely. Pulse tile just fits right in there with everything else. And I guess maybe for defibs, Kirsten, something that's come up is, so defibs are a competitor. I have to say, absolutely not. In fact, it's really great that the defib market already exists, because we have created our entire market strategy based on the existing sales of defib pads. They are, single use. They'll be used in the same setting. And so we've been able to create actual, evidence-backed numbers and market opportunities, based on something that already exists. And where a defibrillator will tell you if a shock is required, it'll say, shock not required. If required, perform CPR. But it doesn't tell you if CPR is required or not. And so that's where Pulsatile just slots right in.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine as well, excuse me, in a sort of surf rescue environment as well, to use the defib. One, you are supposed to be trained in specific use of the defib at surf lifesaving. Two, if the patient is wet or if they have clothing or swimwear, you need to remove that first. And so I could imagine using the two together. Pulsatile goes on quickly. That gives the team around me confidence to do what they need to do while I'm doing all the things, drying and cutting and getting things in place. That could be a couple of minutes of time saved that you've unlocked.
Yeah, 100%.
Paul?
I thought I'd just, on the subject of defibrillators, I'd jump in for Brad's question. Is there a chance the device could be damaged or not operate correctly, when a shock's being delivered? So basically, Brad, we are actually leveraging pulse oximeter technology to do the measurement, right? So it is an optical measurement, but just on the carotid artery. And being optical, we don't need an electrical contact, so that provides some isolation between the body and the device. So the device is safe, but we would anticipate that we'll need to look at shielding of the electronics in the device, that we're not getting a massive noise spike being picked up by the wiring and so forth when a shock is delivered. I suppose realistically, I'd probably anticipate there will be a glitch in the data, but as long as that's suppressed quickly and doesn't sort of get in the way of our continuing measurement, that should be quite manageable. But it's definitely a risk we've identified that we need to keep an eye on during development, but one that we think is technically manageable.
Yeah, thank you. There's a question down here. I might just sort of try and pull the product questions in, and then we can move more on to sort of regulatory and clinical approvals. Is it reusable? What is the life of each device? Do you think it will require maintenance or recalibration?
Yeah, great question. When I first thought of Pulsatile, actually, I will just add this in. I thought of Pulsatile way back at that first cardiac arrest scene that I said. I was like 21 years old on the ambulance. And when I thought of the device, I went to an IP lawyer then, and I said, hey, I've got this really great idea. Can you help me? And he said, great idea, Alicia. Come back with a prototype. And at 21, I was like, what's a prototype? And so for 10 years, not doing anything about it, harboring the secret, but also working a bunch of overtime on the ambulance to save up some money, to then approach a design house to execute a prototype. Now I forget where was I going with this? What's the question?
Is it reusable?
Yeah, right. So when I first thought of it, I was like, of course it has to be reusable. And I have a passion for for sustainability and environment and being kind to our environment and leaving a place for our children that's better than what we have. The market absolutely shows us that reusability at this stage is not going to be viable. So hospitals are not prepared to pay their nursing staff to clean it. Then it would add a whole nother level of complexity regarding sterility. And that just at this stage is not going to be viable. But we absolutely envisage that for the future, we'll have reusable components that can be sent back for refurbishing or recalibration. And to counter the single-use fact that we've got right now, is that we'll be looking to use recycled materials, recyclable materials, and really be as responsible as possible in this space. Regarding the expiry of components, it's going to be very similar to that of defibrillation pads. So there will be an expiry on how long an adhesive can stay in a packaging for. Our battery system, there's no wear on the battery while it's sitting dormant because it will only be activated by that pull tab system. So we only need that battery to be operable for a very short space, a couple of hours during the resuscitation attempt. And there was one other component to that question. Reusable, expiry.
Calibration.
Calibration. You might choose to add to this, Paul, but because each device is manufactured individually as part of a manufacturing cohort, that they'll all be calibrated to the same machining. Is there anything else I should add to that, Paul?
I'll just add that part of the kind of internal engineering of the device is to do some auto leveling and adjustments for things like skin tone and ambient lighting and so forth. So I think there's an element of quality control in the manufacturing process, but then some aspects of the performance are kind of engineered into the algorithms that are sort of being run actively during the measurement. I suppose the other element of calibration is that ultimately we're trying to measure pressure, but we don't need to measure it, to the millimeter of mercury, right? So in that sense, we don't need a kind of high level, certified calibration of the device because it's not being used to that level of precision.
Yeah, you're not sort of reporting blood pressure. You're reporting if blood is moving.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct.
And there's a plus or minus 10 millimeter of mercury sort of range over which the decision can be made. So it gives us a little bit of leeway in that regard.
Great. Nicolette, do you want to build on that point?
Yes. So, to very much to what Paul is saying, the whole device will be developed in a very strict way. So we will find all of the appropriate calibration specifications and make sure that every batch that is released is fit for purpose. So as Paul is saying, we definitely are having a look at what is appropriate for the device, and every device, once it's being used, will already be fit for purpose, and it will be able to be used and then discarded afterwards. And as Alicia has mentioned, this is phase 1 of the product, so we do have the intention to have product commercially available as soon as possible. And then there will be phase 2, phase 3 of the project to build on what we already know and what's already out there.
Awesome. Thank you. Related question on the product side. So will Pulsatile be able to be used with children and I guess small adults as well? Is it possible will it work if only one receiver is connected, if you either can't reach someone fully or if, I don't know, I guess if they have some injury on that side of the neck that prevents it being applied as well? Talk a little bit about these edge case questions.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give a high level, and then if Paul, you want some more detail, and I reckon I'll hand to Nicolette to speak to because it's all about clinical trials and regulatory regarding the age of the patient. And so it's been designed so that there is an array of sensors, and wherever it goes on the neck, it will capture at least one sensor will capture at least one carotid artery. So hopefully that's a pretty clear demonstration that we have identified that as an absolute requirement that cannot be underserved.
Yeah. So perhaps another way of putting that is that the positioning of the device on the neck doesn't have to be millimeter perfect. There's enough leeway in the design to allow a bit of play as to where it gets placed on the patient. The other aspect of that, Joe, is that the wings of the device are flexible, so that allows a lot of compensation for the size of the patient's neck from infants to large adults. And it's not relying on both sides to be working. That's just a level of redundancy to cater for some of those edge cases, as you say, if there's a lot of blood on one side of the neck, we've got the other side to rely on. So I think that hopefully covers off the sort of questions you had there.
Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
covers it. Thank you. So can you talk through the timeline for regulatory approvals and clinical approvals? There's one question on each in here, but I'm sure for anyone on the call, which I assume is most of us who are not a technical medical devices professional, would love to just understand the steps from here and what it's going to take to commercialize the product. What are the next big milestones, and yeah, what are the next steps from here?
For sure. And because I come from a clinical background and not a medical device background, and I've surrounded myself with experts who have, Nicolette's a great one to answer this. I'm sure she's ready to answer it.
Ready to go. So yes, definitely. I think the way that we've positioned this is to have a strategic approach to have product on the Australian market as soon as possible. And typically you have a couple of ways to do that. You can do registrations through the FDA or through CE marking. We have had a look at the product because the product is so novel. We do not think that the FDA approach would be our first port of call, purely because through the de novo pathway, there is a little bit of a longer review time, but also just when we are working with the FDA, they would expect us to do some level of clinical trials in US, which just adds a whole burden of cost to the project. And they will definitely expect us to do usability engineering. So making sure when the product is being used by the intended user that there's no use errors. Everything that we're talking about now as part of a risk management process, we make sure that when the product is actually marketed and it's commercially available, we've reduced most of the errors that can be made when the product is being used. And all of that would have to occur in the US. Whereas with the CE marking process, we can do this in Australia. We can have our clinical trials here. We can do our usability engineering here and then do CE marking. So CE marking will then allow us to have a bigger jurisdiction to sell into, but also bring that back to Australia through the abridgment assessment that the TGA allows. So the TGA says, if you've got an FDA or you have a CE marked product, you can then use that in Australia without going through the normal conformity assessment process that we have here. So in terms of timelines, the EU MDR in Europe did cause quite a bit of a upset to the whole process, but I think most of that has now been smoothed over. I have seen that notified bodies have created a lot more capacity. So my experience up until now is about 8 to 12 months, and that's the whole approval process. And then we'd be able to use it in Australia as well shortly after.
Yeah, awesome. So I think this was on that slide that you showed earlier, Alicia, but what's your sort of anticipated or target timeline for market release, the product actually being used by professionals in market?
Oh, well, I can bring that slide up. I just thought that maybe I'll just speak to it. So our goal is 2028 for it to be made available.
Mm-hmm. Great. Awesome. And what do you see as the risks to regulatory approval? Are there any risks beyond the timeline that you've just spoken through?
I think there's... Thanks, Alicia. Yeah, there would always be risk in any process, right? But we are definitely preempting and making sure that most of those risks are thought through very carefully, and we've got some risk control measures in place. And if we follow the design control procedures that's out there by guidance documents, and if we do the testing and we have our clinical trials, the risks get reduced quite significantly. So more often than not, people start off on this journey and they just start developing a product without really considering all of the regulatory requirements and quality management requirements. They get to a point where they then have to redo quite a bit of work because those things are not considered. And so what we are doing, we are considering all of the guidance documents, all of the standards from the beginning so that we know that we get it right the first time. And then by the time that we get to approvals, there would be minimal questions from the regulator.
Fantastic. There's a question on here around the sort of manufacturing cost. I know you're sort of still in the the prototyping development stage, but do you have a bit of a feel for what the per device manufacturing cost is now and how it's likely to come down as you're able to sort of introduce scale into the process as well?
Yeah, for sure. So we've had early quotes that we can have a bill of materials of $12 per unit. And of course, with scale, that would reduce thereafter. We'd love to keep manufacturing here in Australia. I feel very strongly about that. But knowing too down the road, if we're talking about hundreds of thousands of devices and quantities, and at what point we can reduce that BOM, we'll have to make strategic decisions thereafter.
Fantastic. It might be worth just chatting a little bit about that decision to manufacture in Australia. Why do you feel so strongly about it, and what are the benefits compared to looking at development partners overseas?
Yeah, 100%. And I think it'll be something that's weighed up and discussed frequently throughout this journey, right? Australians love Australian manufactured. So there is a real, that we've got that local support, and we also, want to build opportunity for Australian businesses. So when we manufacture in Australia, it's not just us that we're supporting, but it's every stakeholder in that sort of in that engagement. But also, obviously, it's high quality, and not only that, we're local to where it's happening. And so if there's a glitch, if we need to speak to someone, if we need to see something, we're right here. We don't have to go offshore to go and find it. We don't have to establish offshore relationships to circumvent or navigate issues. And so I just, personally feel very strongly about it, but also, Australia's capable. It's just making sure that, it does support long-term business strategy as well. Also, there are a number of government incentives to keep manufacturing onshore, and we want to leverage those as well.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd throw in there is this sort of technology, wearable physiological monitoring, is actually, from a product development perspective, we're kind of spoilt by there being some really world-class engineering firms that have got direct relevant experience in this domain. So, I think if we're trying to work with the best, we don't have to look further than Australia at the moment. So the product development process, I think we've got really strong partnerships. Some of them are already involved in manufacturing at the sort of thousands to tens of thousands of sort of level. So I think it's, at least in the near future, we've got a really good sort of pipeline or runway there. It's when you get into the really large volumes that I think we'll have to sort of look at the economics of it at that point, and where the market is placed, etc. But short term, we're really well placed locally.
Fantastic. There's a couple of different questions on here around sources of capital and other investors. So we'll just bundle them together. But do you intend to reach out to investors that have a specific focus on this type of automation technology? And have you explored venture capital or similar funding? And how have those conversations gone?
Yeah, 100%. So, look, investment so far, this will all obviously be available in the offer document, but predominantly this project's been bootstrapped by myself. Had some small equity-free grants through an accelerator program I attended with Swinburne University. And then I had an in-kind grant through Medical Device Partnering Program in South Australia. So they produced our second iteration of prototype. So really just been leveraging those equity-free opportunities thus far. Then I opened my pre-seed fundraising round late last year, and thanks to some beautiful angel investors, secured some funding. And then everything sort of died down a little bit towards the end of the year. And so, yes, absolutely, I've contacted VCs. The very typical response from VCs in this space, or from even some high net worths, is that that I'm just a startup. We're too early in this space. That the timeline to return on investment is too long. What was something else that was?
I know some of the BCs that even have a bit of a manufacturing focus, they want to see us further advanced before
Correct.
they're ready.
Yeah. Oh, that's it, right? That they wanted that clinical data to back up their investment or to de-risk their investment. And I'm just trying to communicate to them, I need this investment to finalize that prototype to generate that clinical data. So it's a real chicken and egg scenario, and it's not uncommon when having those conversations with VCs. I attended it was a fantastic opportunity investment conference in Sydney just last week, and I probably spoke to 100 different high net worth family offices, and the focus on quick return of investment, which in terms across all medical devices, we actually have quite a short time frame. But compared to, they're interested in real estate and they're interested in skyrise buildings. And so we just, we're here for impact. We are early phase, there's no doubt about that. But we also, I know Nicolette wants to speak to the timeline. You want to?
Alicia, I just want to confirm exactly what you were saying. So I work with Birchal, but I also have my own company, QA Dynamics, and it is a quality reg development consulting firm, and I work with many different startups. And this is a very usual thing for us to see in terms of investment from VCs. So most of the startups do go through this journey, and that VC portion really comes quite a bit later. And so, and even if it comes, so one of the very successful companies that I've worked with have received funding in a very similar way to what we are doing now. And we are about to, with them, also go commercial, and not having even been touched by any VC. So I think it's a very usual journey, specifically for medical devices.
Yeah.
And
just, I was just going to layer on from my own experience as well. So those of you who don't know me, I've been working as an investor for the last couple of years myself. I've raised capital from venture capital prior to that. It is very difficult to raise capital for hardware. And I think particularly at the moment with the AI bubble, AI is just eating up all venture capital right now. So something that is a physical product that probably has AI working in the back end in a bunch of the sort of algorithms and approaches and things like that informed by AI, but is not a B2B SaaS AI driven software product. It's a really challenging time at the moment if you're raising capital for anything other than that. But by contrast, hardware has done very, very well in crowdsourced funding because crowdsourced funding investors understand hardware. We understand the tangible nature of it. We can see the applications. I mean, the number of questions that we've had during this discussion from people who obviously know what they're talking about in this space, I think just sort of proves that broad appeal. And so one of the reasons that brought me across to Birchal in the first place was to be able to connect connect across this gap to provide funding for great businesses that have huge potential and huge potential impact from people who can see the opportunity there that VCs might miss because they're so narrowly focused, and for then ordinary people to be able to share in the success of companies that they back who go on to win. So just wanted to sort of share that perspective as well because it's definitely not something that's unique to Pulsatile Innovations or the Pulse Tile. It's an industry thing, particularly in Australia being a bit of a small investment market. Paul, you were going to answer about the shelf life. Alicia spoke before around the kind of the durability of the adhesives in the packaging, but what is it looking like the shelf life is going to be?
Actually pressed the wrong button. I was going to start typing that one. But look, so the batteries are 5 to 10 years for a lithium coin cell battery, a coin cell battery, sorry. I think the limitation will be around the adhesives. Ideally, we would like to match the AEDs, so there's a sort of cycle built around that already, and maintaining those around the community. Alicia, do you want to sort of expand on that?
There's not really much else that I would say except that that DFIBs typically have about a 3-year life. DFIB pads, excuse me, being the consumable component of a defibrillator, have that expiry of around a shelf life of 3 years. And so, that's, that it's safe. It makes sure that the product we're delivering is safe. But it also then informs a bit of a business strategy as well, because we know that people will replenish those products. They'll be return consumers. And then, that drives our progress, our project's progress.
And so, I think that 3-year target is what we're looking at, and to the extent that that's driven by the adhesives on the AED pads, we should be able to match that. The batteries and other components, have much longer shelf lives.
Fantastic. There's a couple of questions here around kind of go-to-market and marketing. So, question around whether there's an opportunity to use Pulse Tile in competency-based training in conjunction with CPR and defib training as a way of kind of promoting and expanding the understanding and marketing of the product. And then there's a question as well around the potential that you see for expansion into international markets. So perhaps if you can take both of those together.
Yeah, I love how you just clump all the questions for me together, Kirsten. The first one regarding incorporating into training, absolutely. And then regarding that sort of international sales strategy, Nicolette touched before on getting our regulatory approvals via CE marks, that's Europe, to get an easier abridgment to Australia. That means that we'll already be regulated or have regulatory approvals in Europe. So once we establish ourselves as that sort of, have with that presence in Australia, we generate clinical validation and generate revenue that will be able to support a market that we've already achieved regulatory approvals in Europe, and then we'll follow on with the US. So, the US represents a huge market for this, where I said 26,000 out-of-hospital cardiac arrests occur in Australia each year. In the US, it's 350,000. They have 2.4 million publicly available defibrillators just in the US. And so huge opportunity. And the way we go about it is very much been, strategically developed with Nicolette and in collaboration with, the rest of the team.
And just in saying that as well, Alicia, even though we are aiming to do CE marking first, we are still continuing the discussions with the FDA. So one of the first things that we are planning for this quarter is to have a QSub meeting with the FDA to discuss and confirm exactly what they would expect us to do to get this product registered and regulated under the FDA as well.
Thank you, Nicolette.
Excellent. There's a couple of questions for me on here, or I'm going to take the first crack at them anyway, around the investing process and sort of how investors make money from investing in something like Pulsatile Innovations. So first question, what are the benefits of investing in these early stages? At this stage, you're investing at a very early stage of the business, and that means that you're investing at a price that reflects that early stage. So the valuation of the business will reflect the stage of business that you're investing in. Whereas, say, if you were investing at a later stage when there's already demonstrated profits and sort of a track record that makes it a much lower risk, the valuation is typically higher to sort of reflect that lower risk. And so the way you can make money off an investment like this as an investor is two main ways. The first one is you become a shareholder now, you stay a shareholder long enough for the company to get to a point where it's making money. So it's turning a profit, and then the company decides to invest that profit into dividends and give some money back to the shareholders. So that's typically a bit of a long-term play when you're coming in at the early stages, because usually for the first several years, the company will reinvest any profits they make back into building the product and expanding the product. So you can make money off share dividends, but I would think about that as sort of like a long-term potential. The second way that you can make money as a shareholder in an early stage investment is through the value, the increase in value per share of your investment. So let's say you've invested at this pre-seed stage or seed or pre-seed stage, and then later on the company has expanded its product, it's entered new markets, the valuation of the company has increased, oftentimes when later stage investors come in, they can create what's called a secondary share sale opportunity. So you might have an investor come in at Series C or Series D, and part of their investment is to give earlier shareholders liquidity so that they have the opportunity to sell their shares at a higher share price than what they paid for it. So hopefully that makes sense. So the two different ways that you can make money as an investor is by the company getting to profitability and sharing that profit with investors through dividends, or the value of the company increasing and you being able to sell off your shares or a portion of those shares to another investor at a higher value per share than what you paid for them. From the community perspective, Alicia, I wonder if you can speak to the value that you see in having crowdsourced funding investors, retail investors, people part of your community as shareholders in the business. How do you see them bringing strategic value and helping you grow?
Amazing. Thank you. I was going to say this exact thing. Throughout my journey, I've had so many people, and I think because I'm in that setting already, so many people have come to me and been like, "Hey, I can't afford a $50,000 check or a $100,000 check, but I've got $2,000, I've got $5,000. Can I help you?" And prior to opening up that equity crowdsourced funding campaign via platform, I was not able to accept those small checks, but now we're able to gather that community. Everyone who has approached me sees value in what we're doing, wants to contribute to impact, and now has that ability. And not only is it that financial investment, obviously that's going to provide resources to drive the project forward, that people now see the product developing and can champion it among their own workplaces or their own first aid kits in their own communities. And so that also, we've already seen a significant interest for future market adoption, which has just been an incredible positive side effect.
Yeah, fantastic. I love hearing stories like that because it really sort of reinforces the benefit of this funding model. Just lastly, I know we're close to time, so there's a question here around how do we make sure, both Pulsatile Innovations and Birchal, that there aren't too many cooks in the kitchen? So if you have a large number of shareholders, how do we make sure that they don't actually slow you down and that they do bring that benefit? From my perspective, the technical answer to this is when the offer does go live next week, the offer document will contain a list of all of the shareholder rights. And so have a read of that, and that'll give you a feel for, as a crowdsourced funding shareholder, what rights you have in the company. And generally, the way we sort of avoid any sort of sense of too many cooks is that the sort of more prohibitive rights, or like the more kind of aggressive shareholder rights, are only offered to people who hold a certain stake in the business. So I might just use Birchal as an example. So it's only investors in Birchal that own more than 1% of Birchal that can do things like have a preemptive right in share sales, or have certain responsibilities. So as a Birchal CEO with a Birchal perspective, I have 2,600 shareholders, and to be honest, I find those 2,600 shareholders a lot easier to manage than one or two very vocal venture capital or private equity investors that I've worked with previously in my career. So the great thing about crowdsourced funding is it gives you that sort of breadth of network. It gives you a group of investors who are literally and figuratively invested in your success, and they can offer suggestions and help out, but they don't have that sort of that weight on the cap table that a larger venture capital or private equity investor does, to be able to direct the CEO and founding team in a certain direction, or influence strategy, or kind of force a vote on key issues. So that is, I think, a real benefit of the model as well. Anything to add on that, Alicia?
No, that's fabulous. And I think it just speaks to that. And it's what I've experienced already, like that sense of community, like with, everyone who showed their support so far, all these people who've, to everyone who's attended the webinar, it just adds that validation and, keeps that spark going, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. So, thank you so much for everyone for coming and for your excellent questions. Thank you to Paul, Nicolette, and Alicia for taking the time and spending it to take us through what you're building. Super exciting. The expression of interest period for Pulsatile Innovations is open for another week. So, if you haven't already, please jump on to the Pulsatile Innovations page on the Birchal website. Pop in your expression of interest so that when the offer does go live next Tuesday, you'll be one of the first people who gets a chance to jump in and make that investment as well. So the early access will be open for another week. So if you haven't already, jump on and have a look through the information available on the profile page on the website. Thank you so much for being here and wishing you all a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye.
Good.
Bye.